Welcome to the Limitless Legal Nurse Consulting Podcast. I'm your host, Anna Gray. The best thing about being a nurse and entrepreneur over the last 25 years are the relationships I've developed and the people I've met. As a legal nurse consultant, I wanted you to hear from those amazing people in the legal and healthcare communities. I wanted you to hear who they are and to celebrate them with me. Get ready to be inspired, informed, and empowered. Let's dive into the Limitless Legal Nurse Consulting Podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to the Limitless Legal Nurse Consulting Podcast. I'm super excited today to have the very first attorney on the podcast. So I'm grateful for Loyd Bourgeois to be on the podcast. I'm so grateful for you to be here. I appreciate your time. I know that my audience is really looking forward to hearing from you. So thank you for spending your time with us. So thanks.
Yeah, well, thank you, Anna, for inviting me on and making some time for us to talk this afternoon.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this conversation. I know a lot of people are as well. So let's get into it.
I don't know how much I'll be able to, add to their knowledge base, but I'm happy to try.
Well, I will say it's not really necessarily about the knowledge. What my audience loves is the conversation. So it's really just having a conversation with someone that's interesting, right? And their backstory and those kind of things. So if you could start us off and just to give us an idea of, who you are, where you come from, your story. I know I listened to a podcast that you were on, and so I got a bit of your story already.
Yeah.
But if you could share some of your backstory and how you are, where you are today, how you got to where you are today, but really like your family and where you.
Yeah, no problem. So I'm a first generation college graduate who ended up getting an engineering degree. I don't know quite how that happened. I guess just did well in school, and everybody was like, "Hey, engineering is a good career path." And I live in South Louisiana, and so there's a lot of chemical manufacturing, oil refineries around. Everybody's like, "Oh, engineering's the pathway to a good career." So that's what I did. I didn't really know any better. And then I went work in one of these places, refinery, chemical manufacturing facility for a while, and was like, "Oh, this is so not me. This is not what I can see myself doing." Went to law school, kind of decided like, "Hey, let's maybe go to law school." Went to law school, graduated in 2005, right before Hurricane Katrina. Was going to do was trying to mesh the two, like law and engineering. So went to Tulane Law School, had really good environmental engineering programs, took a lot of environmental law courses. Katrina hits, and that was kind of what most people did around here for a long time, was just Katrina type litigation. I did do a little environmental litigation along the way, mostly on the defense side. 2008 or so, being the only lawyer in the family now, like everyone calls and asks, "Hey, can you help with this? Can you help with that?" Well, I got a call from my grandmother saying, "Hey, your cousin," this was her sister's daughter, "your cousin she's having some problems with like insurance and disability, and I think she needs your help." So I was like, "Sure, I'll give her a call." I called her up and, talked to her. And during the course of that conversation, now this is someone I had known and had known me my whole life. She was kind of my mother's age, but she had known me my whole life. I had known her my whole life. And she's like, "I'm sorry. What's your name again?" And I'm like, "And they're denying you disability and you can't remember your family's name?" And so that's kind of how I really got interested in like disability and helping people fight these battles. And so I didn't know anything about it. I just started like I said, this is 2008-ish. Internet had been around, but it was still kind of in its infancy. Not everybody had websites. I'd started blogging about my journey of learning about how to do disability law. And um, as I was helping her. So we eventually got her benefits. I learned a lot about disability law and was like, hey, there's a lot of people who need help out there. And through that blogging, people really started contacting me just through our website, through a blog, like, hey, can you help me? Can you help me? That gave me a lot of hope and courage to kind of go out on my own and start helping folks fight disability companies, disability insurance companies, and then Social Security. And then I had always done a little bit, even when I was doing Katrina work, some personal injury stuff. And we just started kind of growing into those three areas: personal injury and disability. And that's kind of where we are now. I have a small firm, maybe 20 miles or so southeast of uh, or southwest of New Orleans, kind of near the airport there. I grew up here in South Louisiana, make it my home, married, three kids, one's in college, one in high school, one in middle school. Um, and we kind of grew our firm where we wanted to live. And that's in the community we grew up in. My wife and I went to the same high school, we went to the same college, and we came back to our town and really put down our roots here and became committed to our community, um, trying to grow a business here, trying to be a lawyer here. I help people all over the country with disability cases from a small town in outside of New Orleans.
That's amazing. I love the fact that you share that story. I have to tell you the engineering route, the diversion from the engineering route, I can relate to that personally. My brother, my only sibling, did something very similar. He got an engineering degree and he ended up being in the golf world. And
Okay.
he's the VP of product creation for TaylorMade Golf, but
Yeah.
he started out as an engineer and it was, but he was a golfer and so he kind of diverted, 25 years ago.
Right.
So I love that story. I had heard you share that story before,
Yeah.
so
No.
I'm glad that you shared that.
And as I was, they're very different in many aspects. Being an engineer, being a lawyer, but at their heart, they are very similar
Mm,
because they are about solving problems,
mm,
right? And that's how I really think about them. Engineering is coming at it from a mathematical perspective. There's got to be some kind of way to see this problem, figure out what caused it, and go fix it. The legal side of it is okay. There's some issue that's come up in somebody's life or some businesses. Uh, Formation, its process, and how do we fix it? How do we go about solving it? And I think that really is, to me, what drew me to engineering is being able to
mm.
solve problems. And really what I love about the law is it's still about solving problems. And it's the approaches, while different, have a lot of similarities that mesh well with me, with my
Yeah,
personality.
absolutely. Yeah, I can totally see that. That it makes complete sense. Um, okay, so when you decide, so you felt like that was your calling because of that your experience with your family member, and now you've set your roots with your family, your kids. We were around probably around the same age, college, a college
Mhm.
kid, a high school kid. And now, you're settled in your community, and you're the go-to, I'm sure, for the community. And you said that you have expanded your practice across other states. Have you are you can do you cover all states, or are there certain states that you don't cover?
Yeah. So uh, for our Social Security disability practice, um, so it's kind of federally regulated, and we can handle. we help clients in any state.
Mm,
We haven't helped clients in every state, but we could.
mm,
Um,
mhm,
I don't think especially since COVID, it used to be you had to go to a hearing in person, right? You had to go to that Social Security hearing office, meet with your client there, go in front of a judge there, and show up at the local office wherever your client was. Well, since COVID, they've kind of the Social Security Administration has kind of moved more to video conferencing hearings
mhm,
or just telephonic hearings in an
mhm.
effort to ensure that people are still getting the hearings that they need to get a decision on their disability case. And since then, it's actually made it, much more uh, economical and efficient for us to help folks wherever they are,
Right,
because we don't have to travel to them to meet with them for a hearing.
right.
And while we love it, it's still kind of hard sometimes when, it takes 2 days just to get to some remote location for
Sure.
a 45-minute or an hour hearing.
Yeah,
While we would love to do that, it's just not practical from a
right,
time perspective.
right.
But with the way Social Security handles things now, we have clients all over the country, and we
Yeah.
do things by Zoom, by telephone. Um, on the personal injury side of our practice, we primarily are Louisiana based, South Louisiana based, because you're limited by your bar membership, um,
Mhm.
and we also have a kind of a little niche area that we do. I call it long-term disability, ERISA long-term disability, and so it's a little different than Social Security. Because Social Security is you pay your taxes, you pay into the Social Security system, you can get disability. ERISA long-term disability, you have to have some type of private employer policy. And so what you think about is if you have like health insurance or a 401k plan, a lot of times the benefit package will include like long and short-term disability. Um, and for those cases, we help in many other states as well because it's also federally regulated, and if we have to go to
Mm,
federal court, we can pro hac vice into those cases, into those districts, as long as we have a sponsor. But that practice area is a little more niched
mhm,
as well, and so we can
mhm.
handle that
Yeah.
nationwide.
Yeah. So it's giving you the ability to expand your practice and not just be near the hometown, which
Yeah.
is great. You have the ability to touch more people. So,
Well, and,
um,
the personal injury world, I'm sure, kind of like the legal nurse consulting world, because I see tons of them on LinkedIn, is very competitive. It's a very competitive market, especially in personal injury world. You got, big players, nationwide players like Morgan and Morgan.
right.
I'm sure you have regional players, and every region has their own players who are spending millions and millions and millions of dollars to advertise and to get
Mhm,
clients. Well, we can't do that. We're
right.
not that big. We don't want to be that big.
Right.
And so we have a niche market and a niche marketing approach for our uh, personal injury clients, but we have to also have a way to kind of to keep the doors open and
Supplement
to
that.
help the
Yeah,
people,
absolutely. Yeah.
and for us, it's always been disability because that's kind of what I fell into when I started helping my cousin, and I really love it. And I was, meeting earlier today, we had a client come in who was just like, I mean, I get all these forms, I have no idea. It's just so confusing. I'm like, that's what we're here for, to
Mhm,
help you understand exactly what Social Security is asking you, to help you understand what your insurance company is requesting you send in. Call
mhm,
us. That's
mhm,
so we help with that.
mhm.
And I really do love
Yeah.
those clients.
Yeah, and so obviously you're explaining, what Social Security is asking you for or insurance is asking you for, and a lot of that is on the medical side. So if you could share a bit about the medical side, because I know that a lot of my listeners, we want to know what do attorneys um what do they see with medical records? Because,
Mhm.
we've seen that. I know I've looked at medical records for 25 years.
Right.
So I see one thing and I was trained to see one thing. And so Tell me a little bit about your experience with the medical records, what your take is on the medical records, how you help your clients with the
Hmm.
medical records, and
Yeah.
how that works on your end.
Yeah. So specifically for disability purposes, the medical records are pretty much the linchpin to the case. They're important. They're very important in personal injury cases as well. But in disability cases, you don't really have that opportunity. It's not, you don't get to depose doctors. You don't get to depose multiple doctors. You don't get to bring in plenty of experts to help explain how things happen. And so in disability cases, you are really, truly only relying on your client's medical records to support your claims. And the big, I think, elephant in the room when it comes to medical records for disability purposes is doctors, healthcare providers use medical records for one thing,
Mhm.
and the legal system uses them for a different thing.
Mm.
And so, what do I mean by that? Healthcare providers are using medical records to document uh, what's going on in a treatment history, and pretty much that's it. To help them later, to help somebody else later see kind of where someone's been and where they're going from a medical perspective. So diagnoses, testing, procedures.
Mhm.
On the legal side of things, what is really important for disability cases are limitations. So it's not necessarily you have a herniated disc, it is how this herniated disc affects your life.
Right.
What does it prevent you from doing? What kind of limitations do you have? Can you not walk? How far can you walk? How much can you lift? And these are things that, healthcare providers probably just inherently know or have an understanding of given their extensive experience in dealing with patients with that. But their medical records will just say MRI shows herniated disc at these levels.
Right.
Pain causing. Okay, well, what next? Well, just some people can have a high tolerance for pain and maybe can still go out and be a truck driver, be a heavy equipment operator,
Right.
sell products, be an accountant. Some folks may have a low tolerance for pain and not be able to handle those things, even with the same kind of conditions. But the medical records are not designed to give that information.
Mhm.
And so, from the legal side, we're always trying to talk to our clients about trying to get that information in there. Talk to your doctor about your limitations. Ask them to put this in. So that's kind of the
Yeah.
one of the big issues in our world.
Mhm.
Um, the other big issue is, and I don't know how you feel about this,
Mhm.
electronic medical records. What's
Mhm.
your feeling on those things?
Well, I think that there are good things and there are bad things about electronic medical records. The fact that the information is there and legible because
Yeah.
when I started nursing
Right.
school, we couldn't read a
Yeah.
chart. So
What does this squiggly
so
line say?
right. And so actually, taking care of patients were difficult
Mhm.
when you can't read an order.
Right.
So I think on the electronic side of that, it's made things very clear.
Yeah.
That being said, the redundancy of records also creates a problem with clarity.
Yeah.
I mean, I can tell you right now, I'm going through a 41,000 page medical record.
Yeah.
Okay. When you go through a 41,000 page electronic medical record, am I going to see everything? Probably not.
No, because
If
out
it
of those
was
41,000 pages, probably only a small percentage are actually relevant.
correct, correct, correct. And so you're trying to find the relevant
Yeah.
records or the relevant information, like
Yeah.
you telling your client to sit, tell the doctor
Yep.
how this has affected you. I'm looking for that,
Yeah.
in 41,000 pages. So Yeah, there are good things and there are not so good
Yeah.
things
I mean,
about
I
the
see the
electronic
benefit of
record.
them, but man,
Mm,
for us, it's very similar because
mm,
what we also see too is it's just not, it's not redundancy within the system.
mm,
Because, okay, we ask for a visit date of, these past 10 visits. You'll get 30 pages per visit. And,
yeah,
the problem for us is they all say the same thing,
right,
like they checked it on every visit,
right,
but they didn't.
right.
You know, the
Oh yeah.
HPI will say, oh, patient just went on vacation 2 weeks ago.
Hmm.
They go on a vacation every
Yeah,
2 weeks before every visit. Like, what a
yeah,
life.
yeah,
But then we get into hearings or we get in front of a decision maker and they're like, well, your records say you went on vacation. You can't be that disabled. You can't be that hurt because it's saying you went on vacation.
right,
And you're like, but they clearly didn't. Like, you got to
right.
use some common sense. We're like, well, these are what the records say.
I
I'm just
know.
telling you what the records say.
Yeah.
It is a very frustrating
Yeah,
problem.
they clicked the box and then they forgot to unclick the box.
That's right.
Yeah.
And
No,
it's,
no, I see that. We see that on the medical malpractice side too, as
yeah,
well. You see the inconsistency across the board is,
yeah,
you've got one set of records that say, they've checked off these three things, and then for a medical malpractice, and then the next nurse comes on and they
yeah,
check off five things,
right,
and you know, what happened in those 5 minutes of the
right.
change of shift. So there's a lot of box checking. And
Hmm.
and yes, that's exactly, I can see that carrying over and it making it a very difficult thing to prove because,
Yeah.
well, it says in the records. Yeah, I've seen that.
And even within the one visit note itself, like patient here today because back pain is unbearable. And then you go down to like the objective examination
Mhm.
part, and it's like musculoskeletal, no complaints. Well, I mean, you
Normal.
just said
Normal. Yeah.
they're here because their
Yeah.
back pain is unbearable, and this is normal, no complaints. Like, and then judges, defense counsel, social security judges, they're like, well, I mean, this is just inconsistent. So you know what I'm going to do with it? I'm just going to ignore it.
Throw it out.
Yeah.
So how do you work around that in your practice? How do
Yeah.
you
So
work around those challenges?
we try as best we can to review them early.
Mhm.
And if we see things like that, we have our client call the doctor and say, hey, you got to fix this. This,
Yeah.
I did not go on vacation every 2 weeks before every visit. It happened one time.
Right.
Or, hey, look, I came for back pain on this day, or I came because this was happening, and everything else makes it seem like nothing was happening. So, like, how do you fix this? Like, you got to ask them,
Yeah.
hey, like, I don't know what you have to do on your end to fix it. Put an addendum in and be like, hey, we inadvertently didn't click the right box or unclick the
Right.
right box. Like, put something there. That
Right.
way we can at least see that
Yeah.
maybe this didn't pertain to this particular visit.
Right.
Um, it doesn't
And
always work.
I was gonna say, how successful is that?
It's more successful with smaller practices,
Right.
smaller
Right.
providers.
Right.
If you're trying to deal with a big hospital system,
Yeah.
um, a lot of times we just tell the client, look, just write a letter
Mm.
explaining this and tell your
Mhm.
doctor to put it in your record. Because,
Mhm.
okay, you might not want to fix it, but you're at least going to have something in there
Sure.
showing that
Sure.
this
Sure.
is not correct.
Right.
It's not a fail-safe mechanism. It's not
Sure.
always going to,
Right.
save the day, but it at least shows that
Right.
these
Right.
things are wrong, and we pointed
Yeah.
it out
And
at
that
some
you've
point in the
adjusted.
past.
Yeah. So you have the, yeah. So and then it's the patients don't see that on their end
They don't.
typically. It's just this mystery medical record that
Hmm.
so the fact that you educate your page or your clients about this is really a service to them because I how many records out there in general are incorrect, and yet they
Yeah.
are correct, you know,
Well,
because
nobody looks at them.
what was
Yeah,
charted was is done. On the
that's right.
nursing side, it's like If it was charted, it was done. If it
Yeah.
was not charted, it was not done. And that's
Right.
the kind of rule of thumb that we've always gone by, but we see it all the time, you
Yeah.
know. And
It,
so
it's
yeah,
a
how to
difficult,
work around that is really difficult.
yeah,
And
it's a difficult, look, I understand, like, we're all trying to look for efficiencies in our work. We're all trying to, I'm sure they're trying to see more patients because insurance is paying them less. And so they have to see more. So they have to figure out a way to get what they need without taking more time. But in so many cases, we see it just really, it impacts their
yeah,
clients' lives down the road, their
right,
patients' lives
right,
down the road.
right.
It might be 2 years, 3 years. It may be that nurse is not even there anymore. That doctor may have gone, but these records stay behind. They're kind of forever.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So understanding the medical records on your end, did that take some practice? I mean, I know we talked about the fact that uh using a legal nurse. So maybe you could speak on that
Yeah.
first.
Okay.
Whether or not you use legal nurses, because I know that that's what the
Yeah.
audience is. Oh, okay. So let's hear this. Do you use legal nurses or not? And share what you shared with me before we went live here.
Yeah. So we don't use them that often. And I don't do a lot of medical malpractice, and that's where I've seen traditionally most legal nurses being used. Um, and unfortunately, I would love to do more medical malpractice. It's a political hot potato. It's a very difficult practice area, just from there's a number of legal constraints there that make it difficult unless you are pretty entrenched and pretty established to kind of just take medical malpractice cases. That being said, on just the general personal injury side of our cases, we don't really use them. We've maybe used them a few times in the past to maybe attend like a defense medical examination where we want, kind of someone who has experience and knows what they're looking for and can really document the test that the doctor is performing on our client.
Mhm.
That way, in case there's any discrepancy, any question at the end, we have kind of an unbiased person who knows what they're looking for to say, well, this is what I saw. But
Right.
that's kind of not often. And then
Right.
on the disability side of our cases, it's unfortunately, I mean, I think it would be very helpful to have, but it's
Mhm.
just unfortunate that um, Social Security does not, the practice area itself, it makes it uneconomical for us to use a nurse to review the records and provide the information that we need. It's a low margin practice area.
Right.
And so we in the office have to get very good at being able to flip through records quickly, pick out what we need to pick out, and see kind of where things are going because we can't hand it off to somebody
Sure.
or even like we can't even have a paralegal do it. It just would be it makes
Interesting.
it too expensive for us to do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Um, and so yes, that I think that answered the first part of your question. The
Sure.
second part is yeah, I'm always learning about medical records and like looking up terms. I mean, I just have a medical dictionary,
Yeah.
and that's part of it. Like the first
Right.
time I looked at an MRI, I was like, I have no idea what these mean. I had to learn what discs were and how many they were and where they were and
Yeah.
what the differences. You kind of learn that over time, but you also take classes. You continue to learn. You
Mhm.
continue to broaden your knowledge. That way, you can provide the best service to your client. And sometimes, I've called legal nurses in the past and be like, "Hey, look, I'll pay for an hour of your time. I just need you to
Mhm.
explain this to me,
Right.
right?" Um,
Right.
or just a
Yeah.
nurse, not a legal nurse. I think
Yeah.
what I'm kind of lucky. One of my good friends and next door neighbor is a nurse.
Yeah.
And then another really good friend of ours is a nurse. And so I can always pick up the phone and call them
Yeah.
and, take them out to dinner. bring
Right,
them a
right.
nice bottle of bourbon and say like, "Hey, explain this to me. I
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
I don't understand what's going on here."
We speak in gifts.
Yeah, right.
The gifts with the T.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. And it's very helpful, I think, for legal nurses because a lot of the times we don't know. We just assume that you're looking at medical records and we would assume that you would need help,
Yeah,
take that pressure off of you having to take those classes or you having to,
yeah,
learn that terminology. But like you said, your margin is so thin that it makes sense that you don't have the luxury to, and a lot of the times for legal nurses, it's like, well, we're um more affordable than the physicians, right?
yeah,
We're not even, but again, if your margin is so thin, then, it doesn't make any financial sense
yeah.
to hire one of us. And I
Now
think that that's really helpful
yeah,
to know
and
that.
again, that's just really on the disability side,
Sure.
especially the Social
Sure.
Security
Yeah.
disability side of
Right.
things.
Right.
On the injury side of stuff, I mean, it, part of the issue is like you having a legal nurse would be great to help, but you also have to know the stuff yourself anyway,
Right.
because you're going to be the one to get up and depose
Right.
the doctor, to
Right.
depose the defense side of
Right.
things, to combat whatever their doctors are saying. So you kind of have to know it, and delegating that knowledge to someone else is very difficult because they can't be there asking the questions on the fly like you need to be.
Right. I'm going to pose this question, and I don't know if you've used it. I know you said you have used it in the past, but I know a lot of us will take a personal injury case where it's got,
Yeah.
multiple chiropractic visits and PT visits and all sorts of things and just kind of jumbled and putting it together and really pulling out the things like um missing records, that may
Hmm.
be helpful to you in your case. I know that a lot of the personal injury cases that we do like behind the scenes,
Right.
where it's like, well, they said X, Y, and Z. They're still missing some records here.
Hmm.
And that seems to be helpful to kind of help build the case so that that one record would be helpful. And it's only because of the knowledge that we have,
Yeah.
going through that process. I don't know if you've ever used them behind the scenes in that sense, but I know that it happens. I don't get a lot of personal injury cases, but those are the typical ones that I get. It's like, can you just put this
Yeah.
together? Tell me what I'm missing and really just kind of paint a picture of
Yeah.
my client's journey,
Right. I think
Um,
those cases probably, it's not they don't work in a process, so to speak, but most cases, you start with some kind of conservative treatment and you kind of progress along
mhm, mhm,
a
mhm,
continuum.
mhm.
And then I I could see it being helpful where like your client doesn't has an injury that you're not necessarily familiar with.
Mhm, mhm.
So some type of internal organ injury,
Sure.
maybe, right?
Mhm.
Where there's
Right.
not going to be a lot of information out there
Yeah.
about how this works,
Right.
what kind of testing that you kind of have to have some specialized knowledge for that.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I could see that.
Yeah.
But again,
I'm
it's
just
not, again, it's more the exception than the rule, though, right?
sure. Oh, I see. Yes. Yeah.
It's more like, yeah, it may come up. And when it does, I'm not afraid to use the person, but
Mhm.
it's not something where every day I'm going to look at a case and be like, yes, send this to
Right.
this nurse, send this to this nurse, because
Right.
it doesn't happen, at least for us. And I'm not
Right.
sure there's firms where it may happen more frequently, but for
Right.
us,
It's
that would
pretty
be kind of a one-off.
straightforward.
Yeah, it
Right.
would be kind of a one-off
Gotcha.
scenario.
That's really helpful for us on that side because we don't know, we just
Yeah.
assume you're looking at medical records, you would need help. But if you're consistently seeing things where you understand, obviously you
Mhm.
understand the mechanism of injury, and that you would expect to see those type of injuries
Right.
because you've seen so many of these cases, that you wouldn't need someone outside to tell you that because you've already seen enough.
Yeah.
um, that is really helpful for us to know, because we're jumping in as nurses, we're jumping into an area that we're not familiar with.
Yeah.
We're not familiar with how your practices work,
Right.
and the type of, obviously, the type of clients you have, but really, how does your process work? And it's
Mhm.
always this mystery, and we just assume certain things, and then we, cross our fingers and hope that we got it right. So it's really helpful to hear your side of it, so that we understand that. And I think that that's a big mystery on on the nurses side, is that we don't necessarily understand how the other end, your practice works. And really understanding that, for more and more attorneys would be helpful to us,
Yeah.
so that we're all on the same page. Um, so I appreciate you, being, you know,
And I would
transparent
say like,
about how
yeah,
you do or do not use. And I think in the old days, um, when I had first looked into legal nursing, a lot of the times it was just, assumed that legal nurses were experts. That was it. They were just
yeah.
used as expert witnesses, or again, only for medical malpractice. And then when I circled back around into this world, many years later, it was more of, oh no, we can be used behind the scenes, and just kind of making it make sense to people, telling the story. And I don't know if that's how
Well,
it's still perceived on the attorney side, you know.
I can't speak for other attorneys,
Sure, sure,
obviously, but what I will say, it may also just be me because, like, just in general, in my life,
sure. Yeah, no,
I
that's
like to
great.
know and understand things and
Mm-hmm.
figure them out myself, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas others may are more comfortable with
Sure.
having that delegation, right? Like,
Yeah,
if I'm gonna build a house, I'm probably gonna be there, understanding how the
totally.
blueprints are drawn, the
Mm-hmm.
cement's poured, and
Yeah,
all this kind of stuff. But that's just me, my personality.
right.
And maybe that comes from just having that engineering kind of mindset.
Yes.
Want to try to
Yes.
figure out the problem
Sure.
because I kind of also believe, like, hey, if I can figure it out and work with someone once and then know, then the next time you may not necessarily need them.
Mhm.
Uh, but that's, again, that's me. Other
Yeah.
attorneys may have a different approach and do want to have folks in the background.
Yeah.
Um, I also done a little defense work really early in my career, and they definitely used more, nurse folks with nursing backgrounds to review records, prepare medical summaries, that kind of
Mhm.
stuff.
Mhm. Mhm.
I personally haven't done that as a plaintiff's attorney.
Right.
Um, One, again, it's cost considerations, and then two, like I said, we have to know because we're going to be the ones there deposing the doctor. And in most of our cases, we're not like looking for a standard of care issue. We're not
Sure.
looking like to make sure all of these 10 steps were followed
Mhm.
to get to the outcome or you
Right.
had the bad outcome because that's a more medical malpractice. So we're looking like, hey, what kind of pre-existing stuff and then what happened and did it cause it to get worse?
Right.
You know,
Right.
uh, and we a lot of times are going to rely on that our client's doctor to be like, yeah, this is what happened and this is why
Yeah.
it's worse.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that it makes total sense. And uh so, and you're not the only one, I mean, because you are problem solvers, right? So I think attorneys are natural problem solvers. And so, you're probably the majority, is where you're going to take that on yourself, because you want to know and you want to understand how this happened and their story so that you can speak to it. So you're probably not the exception to the rule. You're probably more of the,
More in line with the rule.
with the yeah, you're more like with the rule. We're
Yeah.
we're looking for the exception, I suppose.
Yeah.
So this is a great conversation, and I know that we're clearing up some mystery in both sides. I think on your
Yeah.
side and on my side. So I appreciate this conversation very much. So, um, what kind of advice would you give a nurse that would be curious if
Mhm.
you know an attorney would need help? Because I know you, I mean, we met on LinkedIn, and
Yeah.
there are, like you said, there are a lot of us out there, and the last thing we want to do is to bother the attorneys, and like
Yeah.
you said it before we went live, you're not a bother. What would your advice be to those legal nurses out there on LinkedIn and trying to build relationships with attorneys?
Yeah. I think it's it wouldn't be advice to not just nurses, but to really anyone who's trying to
Mhm.
run a business or be a professional. And it is to show where you can add value.
Right.
Like, how are you different? How are you going to help me in this case? Like, there's 1,000 nurses that are going to contact me, in the next couple of months on LinkedIn or by sending me a letter. What what separates you for the particular type of thing you are trying to do?
Right.
And it may not even be just nurses, right? Like, I get emails every day from medical record summary companies, uh,
Mm.
which I know a lot of nurses also want to do.
Mhm.
What separates you from them?
Mhm.
Now with the advent of AI, right? Like, there's a lot of I use FileVine as my case management, and within FileVine, there's AI built into it that I could just buy and click a button and get a summary of a medical record,
Yeah.
for a couple of bucks, and it
Yeah.
takes a couple of minutes. Well, it may not always be correct, right? So you got to figure out what differentiates you and where you're going to add value. Like, this case is only going to be worth so much.
Mhm.
If I bring you in,
Mhm.
how can you make it worth more?
Right.
How can you help us figure out where that worth comes from?
Mhm.
It may be like, look, we'll make sure your medical records are correct
Mhm.
and work with the doctors and the facilities if they're not to get them
Right.
correct.
Right.
I don't know. I'm just kind
Right.
of throwing out some
Yeah,
ideas.
no. Yeah, that's
Um, because those summary companies, they're just going to summarize what's there. They're not providing me any analysis of it.
mhm.
Um, it may be where you can be like, look, you get a summary, I'll take a look at it and go figure out where the holes are,
Right.
because this hole is going to be important in this type of case.
Mhm.
It might not be every case, right?
Yeah.
But it might be there may be certain injuries that you have experience with that
Mhm.
you got to find certain things for,
Mhm.
maybe certain types of diseases, especially if you're talking about some type of long-term exposure disease where you can start seeing markers along the way that
Mhm.
from experience,
Right.
that you can bring that value. And so I would say it's just like any business, any type
Yeah.
of professional. Where are you adding value?
Right.
Because if you're just trying to do something that everybody else can do, why am I going to choose you over
Right.
everybody else?
Right. Right. You're right. And would you say, I love that, uh, because it's true. It's how do you stand out above the crowd? Um, would you say, and this is just for those legal nurses on LinkedIn, instead of, sending messages, the value, people share content, right? So
Mhm.
what kind of value, uh, content value would an attorney be like, oh, and then you consistently see the same thing. Oh,
Yeah.
that's interesting. Oh, that's interesting. D- does that even play into, is that even in play with
Yes, I
attorneys
would.
on LinkedIn. If you can kind of give an insight of that, like what's valuable to you when you're scrolling LinkedIn, you know,
Yeah, I
'cause
would
that's
love.
also a mystery.
I mean, just look at what attorneys are writing, right?
Yeah.
Like, here's a case study of how we got this client the result they wanted, or we secured this large verdict, or we, got a summary judgment for our client. Um, and how can you use that type of approach from a nurse's perspective?
Right.
So, hey, how one legal nurse was able to review some records and find XYZ, which resulted in the client then getting a verdict of X million of dollars. To
Right.
the extent that and can
Sure.
maintain, you have to kind of, unless you have specific permission, you kind
Sure.
of have to be a little more circumspect about it. But I am sure there are stories where you can say, like, hey, look, I was able to, through my work,
Hmm.
this is what I found.
Hmm.
And write that case study,
Hmm.
write a good headline that's going to
Hmm.
grab someone's attention. Like, hey, I did X and it resulted in Y.
Right.
And then I can read that and be like, oh, I can see that applying to me now,
Right.
right? I can see where I can maybe use it, or I have that type of case. Let me call,
Mhm,
right?
mhm, mhm.
Um, a lot of the stuff that I see is more just like, hey, I'm here if you need me. Hey, if you ever have a medical
Yeah.
question, just give me a call.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
Like that's not helping
Not
me.
valuable,
It's
right.
not helping me make a decision to call you. That's what everyone
Right.
else is doing.
Mhm, mhm,
Um, and so, yeah, doing podcasts like this, right?
mhm,
Adding some value, not just for the nurse community, but for the legal community, for other folks to say, like, yeah, this is interesting. I can see her
mhm,
helping me. I can see
mhm.
him helping me with that case.
Right.
Um, those are the things that are going to stand out much more than just the message on LinkedIn.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. You've basically given everyone the formula. Here you go.
I don't know
X,
about
Y,
that.
X, Y, and Z. That's it. I mean, follow this and here. No, but I totally see that. And
That's the
it's
engineering background,
yes,
X
I
plus
totally get
Y, a squared plus b
it.
squared equals c
Yes,
squared.
right. You speak in engineering terms. No, but I'm a big fan of processes and formulas.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know why. I was definitely not an engineer. I was not a math whiz,
Yeah, but nursing is
but
very
I
scientific. You have to kind of go through a
right.
process. You
Right.
got to follow a
Processes
process.
just make things a lot simpler. So I really appreciate you sharing that for the community because it really is just a this mystery and we just all kind of are mind readers and those that dig in and try and fail are the ones that find the results. This is my version of trying and failing, doing a
Yeah,
podcast and talking to an attorney and like, let's just talk it out and see. And so I appreciate you doing that. How can we as nurses support you and share your practice, your mission across the social platform? Because I want to obviously as a nurse help you and we all want to help you. So how can we do
yeah,
that?
great. So, I mean, we're obviously active on LinkedIn. You can check us out. I think it's Loyd J. Bourgeois. Um, I'm sure you'll be able to spell that the first time correctly. Uh,
No.
um, um,
Fingers crossed.
our website's a lot easier. It's ljblegal. .com. We're pretty active on Facebook, like I think Instagram and LinkedIn. Read our stuff, share it,
Yeah.
reach out to connect with me if you have questions. I'm more than willing to help. I would say evangelize to your nurse friends about making sure the medical records are correct,
Yeah.
making sure that
Yeah.
you're accurately documenting what's going on with
Yeah.
the patient and not just relying on the technology. Um,
Yeah.
the technology is a tool. It is not the book. It is not the whole shed, right? You have to use the technology to help, but it can't be the thing that does it all.
Yeah.
And so to help, I think the biggest help nurses can have is to evangelize about making sure medical records are correct.
Right.
Because they are very important in people's lives.
I love that. Thank you. And all of your information will be in the show notes. I have all that information, so people will be able to click on it and find you and send you a message just thanking you. I'm sure that seems to be what people do after they listen to this podcast is they like to reach out to the guests and say, hey, you inspired me. So I hope and I know that will happen. And I appreciate you again sharing your knowledge and expertise and your mission in life on a topic that many of us don't know. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I look forward to listening to it when I walk around the neighborhood.
Great.
And then looking forward to see your growth in the podcasting world.
Appreciate it.
Awesome.
Thank you for joining us in this fun conversation on the Limitless Legal Nurse Consulting Podcast. I hope you found this episode as inspiring and empowering as I always do. And I hope that you share this episode with your friends. If you enjoyed it, I would love it if you could leave us a review or comment, as I would love to share them in the future episodes. Or hop on over into my DMs and send me a quick message. I can be found on Instagram at anna.b.gray, on my website at limitlesslnc.com, and over on LinkedIn at Anna Gray. And I want you to remember, you are limitless. Until next time.